Geek Soup. And so this is going to be fun because we're talking to a new friend today, Liz Garn. Hi, Liz.
Hello. Hey.
And I know Liz from Twitter, and that's all that I know Liz from. But she... Okay, so I think one of the earliest things that I remember from you, and like the thing that made me want to like make sure that I followed you on Twitter, was a couple of years ago you did something special for your husband at Christmas.
Oh my gosh. That's how you found me.
I can't remember if that's like the very first thing, but it's one of the early things that I certainly remember. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's so sweet that you remember that. Yeah, I wrote him a 24-day mini campaign leading up to Christmas. And so, is this what you're thinking of?
Yes.
Like, am I on the right track?
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So every day I would lead him through just like a little bit of the story, and yeah, so it was like a little countdown to Christmas adventure.
And
It was
so
really fun.
can you give us like a brief synopsis of what happened? Or is that going to be too much information? What sort of campaign were we running?
It was kind of a Feywild campaign.
Okay.
Very, very. I'm trying to think how to best explain it. It was, you're trapped in the Feywild, basically in a haunted house.
Okay.
Only it's more like a Christmassy haunted house.
Okay.
So, and every day you would go through one room. So it was kind of like this was happening in your character's dreams, but you're trying to rescue somebody at the very last room.
Okay.
And so every day you'd wake up and you'd go about your day, but every night you'd dream in the Feywild, and you're trying to get through each room to get to this person you're trying to save at the end. And so every room had like nutcrackers and king mice and all different like Christmassy and wintry and typical D&D winter monsters and stuff. It was really, really fun.
Fantastic. So it was basically a personalized D&D advent calendar adventure.
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
Like when I saw that, I was like, I think I replied to the post and said to you, like, your husband won at life, basically. Like this is one of the coolest things I've ever heard of. So
thanks.
that's amazing. So yeah, we're gonna be talking about D&D today, Dungeons and Dragons. We're going to talk just about the game in general. We're going to talk a little bit about the movie. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about the other movies. But let's start off like so obviously you already have understood that Liz is super awesome and she loves her husband very much. What else should we know about you, Liz?
Well, I mean, those are really important things. So I have 3 kids, and so I do a lot of just your typical mom stuff. I'm a writer, so I used to write for a really cool organization called Christ in Pop Culture.
That's probably how I first found you. I probably read something that you wrote for Christ in Pop Culture because I read their stuff a lot.
Oh, yeah. So that was really fun, and I still try to submit stuff over there, but I am not officially on the staff anymore.
Okay.
Because, parenting and all that stuff.
Yes.
COVID.
Right. Yeah, no, I have 5 kids, so I know about the parenting situation.
That's so cool. I'm like restraining myself from asking all sorts of questions about your kids.
We can talk later about the kids. I would love to.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's me. I'm a writer. I have a book out that's way more nonfiction, faithy, and
see, I asked if you had something to plug, and you said no. But we're gonna
well,
talk about that.
Well, it came out years and years ago, so it's not. I mean,
okay,
it was a couple years old.
All right,
it's okay.
That's fine.
Nothing to plug right away.
Okay. So what? Can you remember like what your first entree into geek culture was?
Yeah. So I started dating this guy in college who was a huge geek, and that was it. That was the
Oh,
beginning
okay.
of the end.
Wow.
Because I grew up in a household of non-geeks.
Yes.
There were 5 kids in my family, so we did very girly girl things and preppy things and
Uh-huh. Okay.
youth group things. And then all of
Okay.
a sudden one day I came home from college and I was like, I started reading this great book by this author called Robert Jordan. And my
Oh
parents
my.
were like, what has happened to you?
Wow.
Um,
Okay, how did you feel about let's do like 45 seconds about the Wheel of Time,
yeah.
because tell me what you thought about it first, like as a whole, as a series.
Okay. Well, full disclosure, I haven't finished it.
Oh, okay.
So,
All
I
right.
mean, this is 20 years in the making. So I really enjoyed the first few.
Uh-huh.
I got bogged down in the politics.
Yes. Oh my gosh. So
So,
did you have you only made it through like 3 or 4 of them, or?
no, I think I'm on book like 8 or 9.
Oh, okay. So
Um,
you're in too deep already. You're going to have to finish it
yeah,
at some point.
probably, but it'll take like a month of like reading synopsises for all the other books to remember what happened.
So I got through it in it probably I started when I started it was already mostly almost over.
Uh-huh.
Um and man, like long about book 8 or 9,
Hmm.
I was dying for it to be done with it, because
Yeah.
like when like literally there are entire books that go by where nothing of like any real relevance to the overarching plot happens.
Yeah, that's
and
certainly how it felt.
and I like at this point I actively discourage people from reading it because
Well, there are better if you're gonna like try to encourage someone to read a good fantasy series, that's just not where I'd start at this point
right
because of that.
now there are like amazing things, there are like moments of like transcendent like coolness
Oh,
in the Wheel of
yeah.
Time, absolutely. Like I would not refute that for a second. But yeah, just as a series, it it really bogs down in all kinds of
Yeah.
crazy stuff. Okay.
And I almost feel guilty saying that, but
No, no, no.
that's where it is.
No, that's valid.
Okay,
Okay.
good.
So then this guy, is that who you married then?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
It's
super.
pretty great.
Fantastic. All right. So then, okay, cool. So you didn't grow up like interested in geeky stuff. So tell me from your childhood, like what your perception of D&D was before you actually like understood, or did you even know about it?
It's so interesting. I have one memory from my childhood of D&D, and it was sitting on a bus going to middle school, and one of the people on the bus talking about playing D&D, and I just knew that it was bad. And so I'm assuming that like somebody had said something about that.
Uh-huh.
Like it wasn't just a innate natural like inclination. It was someone had told me that that was really bad and like dangerous and like
Yes.
no good youth group going Christian girl would ever
Right.
play it. And also it's really nerdy and so the boys can go play it on their own.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, I don't have any firm like you're not allowed to play that
Uh-huh.
memories. It's just this weird sense of that's not okay.
Yeah. Okay. That's fun. I had a
What about
cousin. Yeah, I had a
yeah.
cousin who played, and he was kind of. I mean, uh, it was definitely something that was looked down on,
Hmm.
and probably. I don't know if my mom and dad actually like had a super like awareness that he did play D&D.
Hmm.
But they definitely would have. They certainly would have said you should not do that. If
Yeah.
I had brought it up.
Strongly discouraged.
Yeah, yeah. Like and like I love my dad like crazy. But
Hmm.
he has always sort of had like at best this sort of attitude of like benign like dismissiveness toward
Uh-huh.
like all of like geek culture and stuff.
Hmm.
So that's sort of that's sort of an ongoing struggle.
Yeah, I get
um,
it.
but yeah, I definitely so a strong like association with D&D that I have from my childhood is I went on a road trip with this cousin and my dad's
Uh-huh.
parents out west when I was going into the 4th grade.
Okay.
And on this trip, there was a copy of a book that my grandmother had called Playing with Fire.
Oh
And
no.
yeah, and it was basically like a handbook for the satanic panic of
Yep.
the 80s and 90s.
Ugh.
And so what's really funny about that book is fast forward about 12 years or so from there, and
Hmm.
I was attending university at Cedarville University.
Okay.
It's a
Yeah.
Christian school in south western Ohio.
Hmm.
And I had I had started to play D&D with some friends from there, because of course when you grow up in a kind of restrictive Christian house, like the first thing you do as soon as you get to college is go and do all the things that you weren't allowed to do when you were growing up,
I mean, obviously.
obviously. Unless, maybe not all of them, but at least the ones that
No.
at least the ones that aren't like actually bad. You're finding out,
Yeah, I dyed
where.
my hair.
Oh, okay, cool. Um,
Yeah. Big act of rebellion.
right on. Yeah. So, for my composition class, I wrote a paper about like why D&D is not actually from Satan directly. Um,
Nice.
and so sorry, so this book, Playing with Fire, had a whole section about D&D and role playing games and how they're very 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 bad. And what I found, and so I looked it up. They actually had a copy of it in the library, because one of the co-authors of the book was a member of the faculty at Cedarville, and he was
Oh.
actually my very own advisor.
Oh no. Oh my
which was
gosh.
which was so much fun to find out. I did not bring up the conversation with him, um, because
You weren't interested in that?
as I reread the book, I realized, um, you know, that he actually had no idea what he was talking about when it
Oh yeah.
came to D&D. Like it was very clear that he had never like actually
Hmm.
opened a D&D book to get like firsthand, you know,
Yeah.
familiarity with the material. Um, so what has your experience of D&D been like then as an adult? Like, do people give you like major side eye if it comes up? Like, how has that worked out for you?
Well, it's certainly changed over the years. Because I mean, I started playing D&D. Well, I started at Pathfinder first.
Oh, okay.
Um, and then 5e came out and we switched to 5e. Yeah, like 6 months or a year after it came out.
Uh-huh.
Um, so, for the first huge chunk of my D&D experience, I almost didn't even talk about it because I didn't know a single other person other than the like handful of friends we played with. I didn't know anybody else who had ever played.
Okay.
Um, or if I did mention it, then yeah, there was definitely that side eye of like, okay, 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 okay. So many questions,
Yeah.
how is it that you're playing, and isn't that bad, and it's so geeky, and this is weird, and
Yeah.
just a lot of confusion. And certainly that's changed over the years. I mean, in the last couple years in particular, as um, familiarity with it and um, just a really big push I think it's grown in popularity,
Sure.
to the point where at this point, um, if I mention it, most people are like, "Oh, that's really cool," or
Mm-hmm.
I'll get a
Mm-hmm.
lot of, "I've always wanted to try that," or, and it's funny because you're like, "Oh, you should totally try it." Um, but yeah, so it's been nice the last couple years. People are not as confused, but certainly when I first started playing, um, my parents were kind of like, what now? What are you doing?" And
Yeah.
I'm like, "No, no, no,
Oh,
it's with my church friends, Mom."
even recently, I had, um, yeah, like a note from my mom because she had gotten wind of like some plans that I had to, to try and start a role playing group at the church that I'm going to now. And she was like,
Nice.
"Oh, I don't know. It's, that's dangerous and so on." So yeah,
Yes.
still
Well,
kind
that
of
was
dealing with some of that.
really is. When I first started writing for Christ and Pop Culture, that was a lot of what I wrote about was D&D for the church and what
Yeah.
the church should know about this and questions that Christians might have about it. And I definitely heard from a lot of people who were like, "I'm trying to start a game, but there's a couple people," and I gave them this article, or it was good to have like a written document almost to say, no, 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 this is actually a really good thing. Not only is it not harmful or bad or inherently dangerous, like the Satanic Panic led so many people to believe,
Right.
it's actually really fun and very beneficial. There's a lot of good that can
Yeah.
come out of it.
Well, and the whole thing that I'm, thinking of going into trying to start a group at my church is
Hmm.
like the sorts of people who would gravitate toward D&D just kind of by nature would tend to be, again, we're speaking in broad stereotypes here,
Sure.
would tend to be sometimes the kids who might fall through the cracks on
Yeah.
other sort of more conventional type, sport
Uh-huh.
things, or like going, really wanting to go out for, like, bowling, or whatever the kids are doing these days.
Yeah.
um
I
and and like it's so easy to, I was talking to the youth pastor at the church. He was like, what would success look like if we
mhm.
if we started up the group? Like, what would it be? And like, it's so easy for it to be a success because, like, all you need is like two kids who are interested in this.
Yeah.
And like, it wouldn't have to be a long-term thing. If you could get two kids
Mhm.
to come regularly for 6 months, like,
Yeah.
that would be a roaring success. you know
It really would. And
because
it's
then,
so
like, it's building community. It's like
mhm.
getting these people comfortable with, like, interacting with people and like thinking through situations and problem solving and like
Yes.
doing things like as a group. It's a group effort, it's a group activity.
Uh-huh.
And like, there's so much potential for like building good community in
Oh yeah.
in that context.
I love that. I love that you're thinking about doing that. My kids started going to the D&D club at their middle school,
Okay.
and um, last year was just my daughter because my son wasn't in middle school yet,
Uh-huh.
and she was the only girl, and there were about six guys, and
Uh-huh.
that was the club,
Yeah.
and they played and she had a great time. She loves it. This year, I think by the end of the year, they had like 30 kids
Holy
come.
moly.
Yeah, it
That's
like
crazy.
wildly exploded. And you're absolutely right. It's a lot of kids who aren't haven't really found their place, you know?
Yeah.
They want to hang out, they want to be silly, they
Mm-hmm.
want to play pretend in a way that's like age appropriate and not like, you know, too weird,
Yeah.
um and they can hang out and just relax together, and it's been awesome.
Yeah. Well, I'm super looking forward to like age appropriate ways to get my kids into this, because right now
Yeah.
like their big thing. So my kids are 13, and then 6, 4, 3, and 1.5.
Oh my
So
goodness.
like that middle group, and Caleb, my oldest, he gets in on it too. Like
Uh,
their big thing that they love to do right now is like they it's what they call their imagination game. and
yes.
and basically they just like role play as like the superheroes that they like. And so the middle three are super into Spidey and his amazing friends right now. And so that's what
Nice.
that's what they do, and they like thwip around and fight Doc Ock, and oh no, there's the Green Goblin, and like all kinds of stuff. And so like they're already like totally in that zone. And like at some point it's going to be like, okay, so we're going to do imagination game, except it actually has rules.
Uh-huh.
And so it's not going to be like, oh, I missed you, no, you hit this, and like, you know, all the
Uh-huh.
silly stuff
Absolutely.
that kids do. um but okay, so just from your experience of D&D, then I'm curious, what do you have like a favorite class, or anything that you kind of gravitate towards?
Wow. I'm so glad you asked that. Um, because it's probably like whatever class I'm playing at the moment.
Uh-huh.
I started with a barbarian because they're kind of simple.
Yes.
And then I moved to a bard because I tend to like when we play MMOs online, I often was like healer classes,
Uh-huh.
and like AoE kind of things. So I ended up doing a bard, but that was not great. I didn't love playing a bard.
Bards are
Um,
tough.
they are. Yeah, I have thoughts on that, but it's not bad. I just wasn't for me. But right now, I am playing a warlock, and I love it.
Okay.
Love it.
Okay, because
Yeah.
like on paper that's like the worst of them all.
I know.
because
Well, everyone
because
thinks that, but
you've
they're
you've
just wrong.
literally sold your soul to the devil to play a warlock, Liz. So what do you have to say for yourself?
Okay, well, so so there's so many things that I could say, but I will say that my character, we are playing with some of the unearthed arcana.
Okay.
So my character is actually a warlock of the Raven Queen, who is neutral,
Okay.
which um my husband is the GM for this group, and he absolutely hates it because the problem with having a neutral patron is trying to figure out why that's a problem. Like, what is the Raven Queen going to ask my character to do that my character really doesn't want to do? Like, right now, everything's great. She hates zombies. I'll hate zombies too. Not a big deal.
So just for context, the Raven Queen is like a death deity a little bit, right?
Yes. Yeah. So she is like the goddess who ushers people from life into the afterlife. So, um, think of like the river crossing boat guy in mythology.
Charon, yeah.
Yes, yeah, yeah, it's that. So she's neither good nor evil. She doesn't have strong opinions about what's going on the planet or anything. She hates people or creatures that try to defy death. So sentient undead, she has a hatred towards. So
Okay.
vampires, that kind of thing. Um, but otherwise, she's just kind of there, like fiddling with the strings of fate,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, which has been fun. But insight into what's going on in our game that I'm really excited to get back to is my character has a cursed object that she doesn't know is cursed,
Ooh, those
and
are always fun.
yes, so she is actually becoming really bad, but doesn't know it yet. So
Wow.
so he's kind of like skirted the whole issue of the patron and the you know commitment to an evil fiend, and just kind of cursed me anyways. um,
That's
but
funny.
I never wanted to play an evil character, and now I've got this character that's becoming evil, and I am aware, but
Uh-huh.
my character's not aware, and nobody else at the table, like none of the other like actual
Oh,
players.
cool. I've
have
always
figured it out yet?
So I've done some DMing myself, and I've always wanted to do the thing where I have like sort of a secret deal with one of the players that the other ones
Yes.
don't know about. Um,
Yes.
that sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's what it is. And I figured it out and was like, is my character, did she kill all those people? And he was
Yeah.
like, yup, but you can't tell anybody.
Wow.
Okay. So,
Okay. Um.
but
Cool. And so, what race is she? Just out of curiosity.
she's just human.
Okay, human warlock. All right, right
Yep.
on. Okay, so we have like so we're like almost a half hour into this, and we've been making a whole lot of assumptions about like how much our listeners actually know about D&D.
Oh, you're right. Yeah.
So
Sorry, guys.
yeah, so we're just gonna take a really quick history lesson on D&D. It actually evolved from a war game called Chainmail, which is basically just sort of a medieval type like miniature like battle reenactment kind of
Yep.
thing. And you may have heard of the name Gary Gygax, and he was an aficionado of this game, and at one point thought, we have rules for this piece that's a catapult that does, area of effect damage on the field. Wouldn't it be really fun if instead of a catapult, this was actually a wizard casting a fireball? And that was sort of the genesis of the fantasy aspect that grew into like Dungeons and Dragons being like a full-on like fantasy role-playing game with all sorts of other magic and not just fireballs. And 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 for me, like that's the main thing to keep in mind if you've ever been around somebody who has like a weird aversion, not weird, anyone who has an
Yeah.
aversion to D&D because there's magic. Like, it's important to understand that the magic in the game is it's a game device. Like, it's
Yeah.
just a method to make stuff happen in the game, and you can do all sorts of different things with it. There is no there's no reasonable way to characterize what happens in the game as any sort of anything that even like is approaching like quote unquote doing magic. Like,
Mhm.
you never are like, you don't set up any um what's the word I'm looking for, like elaborate like
Rituals or anything
rituals.
like that.
Like,
Yeah.
you don't like put ingredients into a cauldron, or like, you know
None of that.
you know cut your hand open with a knife, or anything
Oh gosh.
anything like that at all. And like, there are some really just there's just some bad information out there, like, especially Liz, I'm sure you're familiar with the chick tract of
Yeah.
Dark Dungeons.
Uh-huh.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
like this kind of stuff, just literally like it's not even, it's making stuff up. Like,
Yeah.
there was an episode of Adventures in Odyssey where a kid came to
Oh gosh,
town. Like, you
yes.
know about that one?
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah, this kid came to town, and it wasn't called Dungeons and Dragons. It was, something else that was, alliterative and sounded similar. Maybe it was like Mazes and Monsters, or
Yeah,
whatever.
something like that.
And like, he roped some of the local kids into playing, and um it was very ominous, and very scary, and Mr. Whitaker really felt like there was some spiritual warfare going on, and
Oh
uh
gosh.
and
Yeah.
and so, like, they're just, and so a lot of this stuff comes from like anecdotal stories about
Yeah.
bad things happening to people who play D&D. And like, the best known one, and I forget the guy's last name. It was about a guy named James who was at a university in Michigan, and he was an avid D&D player, and so he also he ended up committing suicide, and his mother came to the belief that it was because he had been involved in D&D, and the sort of the truer version of the story is that he had been really horribly bullied at school because he was gay, and he was depressed because of that, and that's really what led to his suicide. Because when you look at the statistics, and this is a lot of this is like 20 years old, because I'm pulling most of this from the research that I did for my paper at Cedarville, but I'm sure I have no reason to think that the numbers are any different now, and in fact they're probably even better at this point. Statistically speaking, when you look at D&D players, their likelihood of self-harm is actually far lower than the average teenager.
Yeah.
And I think that has a lot to do with something that we sort of touched on earlier, is that like this is an activity and a hobby that sort of like intrinsically, like, it's hard to be a D&D player and not like build community with the people you're playing with. Like if you're in a D&D group and you like remain like super standoffish and disconnected from the people that you're playing with, like you're kind of doing it wrong, and that's just not a sustainable situation. Like either the group will like choose a different night to play and like not tell you, or you're gonna be miserable and quit. Because
you'll be missing out,
because like it doesn't work to be like a super depressed and like angry or bitter or sad person and like be in this group and not have the people that you're playing with like catch on to that, or like so my experience, at least, and I'm sure it must happen sometimes, but like my experience has uniformly been like the people that you play role-playing games with, like there's a huge time investment usually that's involved.
Yeah.
And like you don't do that with people that you can't stand mostly. Yeah. and like when you are putting that time in and having fun together, like that just builds your bonds of friendship like that much more. Like I think that playing D&D with a group of people is going to be so conducive to like enriching your community and building you up together as friends, like almost more than any other like conventional activity that I could even think of,
100% agree. Yeah, it's so good at, I mean, for the most part, you're sitting face to face with people,
Yeah.
whether it's, at an actual table or even on a screen, and then you're cooperating together, you're working together to tell this story, whatever the story might be. And in the process, you're experiencing something, that you guys have shared something that's perfectly unique.
Right.
You're the only ones will have experienced that story in the way that you have, and that experiencing something together will naturally bring people together in a way that we don't get just, necessarily sitting around talking or going to see a movie together or stuff like that.
Yeah. And sort of the funny thing about that is that like also that sort of makes it like one of the like the worst things is like somebody trying to explain like what happened in a D&D session to you in any detail at all. Like
Yeah.
for me, that's one of the most insufferable things ever. Like
Yeah. Like
because
I don't. Yeah.
yeah, because you weren't there. It doesn't really matter. Like if there's a way to like really really condense something super fun that happened down into like a 2 sentence anecdote, then that's okay. But like
Is this when I apologize for just telling you about my D&D
no,
campaign?
no, because I asked you about that. Like that was an interesting thing
Okay, good.
because that was
I
super.
tried to keep it concise too.
Yeah, no, you absolutely did a great job because that was a super special thing that was unique and amazing. Um, but uh, yeah. Okay, so why don't we go ahead and transition from that into like let's talk about Honor Among Thieves a little bit.
Yes. Let's do that. I loved it.
Uh,
Did you enjoy it?
I also loved it. Like I don't know, like okay, so did you see the other two movies that came out in the 2000s?
Okay. So the short answer is no. I
Okay.
have seen clips from them, like
Uh-huh.
I've watched things about them, but I haven't actually sat down and watched. In part because I love the game so much that I hate like the misrepresentations and stuff like that that happened.
Yeah, they're not great. They're super not great.
Mhm.
And so I had pretty low expectations coming into this, but like
Yeah.
I knew the cast was solid. And
Mhm.
it's, and we're sort of in a time and a period of our culture where like everything geeky is now kind of mainstream.
Yeah.
And so I had a sense that like they were gonna be careful to
Mhm.
not like alienate people. Like it's big money, it's big business, it's a big investment with potentially huge return. And
Yeah.
so um and not just at the box office obviously, but in the form of like more and more people just being continuing to be interested in the game.
Yeah.
And so I had low expectations, but I was cautiously optimistic because the trailers had been good. Chris
Mhm.
Pine is great. Um,
Yeah.
Hugh Grant is great in his own way. Um, and yeah, no, it was fantastic. And like for me, like there's a lot about the movie that really does capture kind of the essence and the vibe of really
Mhm.
playing the game. Like
Yeah.
um and you could be super critical about it if you want and say like, oh, it's just this series of fetch quests and whatever. But more often than not, that's kind of what the game ends up being. And so in
Yeah.
that sense, it's a pretty true representation. Um, but like it was really well put together. Like it's a
Yeah.
lot of fun. It's super accessible. Like that's
Oh
what I
yeah.
was, I think, most impressed by is that like if you like heist movies and you can
Mhm.
even like remotely hang with like magic and stuff, then
Yeah.
you're gonna love this movie because it's a it's a great heist movie.
Yeah.
um
Exactly. It's a fantasy heist movie
yeah.
with like D&D elements. So like those of us who love D&D, we're watching it, we're like, "Oh, I know that monster. Oh my gosh, they brought in that." And I loved all the little nods, but at the heart, it's just a really good heist.
Yeah, like and there are so many little fun, Easter eggs for people
Uh-huh.
who actually love the game, and even for people who are into like the extended lore of like the books and stuff. Like they
Oh yeah.
mentioned they mentioned Elminster, who's been a huge figure in
Uh-huh.
the Forgotten Realms books. Um And I'm glad. It's cool that they went into the Underdark and we didn't see a single drow. Like I kind of actually like that, because that would have been
Mhm.
so easy.
Yeah.
Because that's sort of the stereotypical thing. You're in the Underdark. Okay, there's probably drow and mind flayers, and we didn't have either of those, and that's good. Um,
Yeah.
like it left places to go. Like there's so much,
Mhm.
and that's the other thing about D&D, like the lore that has been built up around the fiction that's been inspired by the game is so expansive. Like
Yeah.
literally, I'm sure there are hundreds of D&D
Oh.
novels. And
More. I'm sure there's so many.
yeah, like and honestly, like, and I'm a huge reader, and I've read some, but
Mhm.
I haven't even read a lot of
Mhm.
D&D novels. Like I've read a fair number of novels about Drizzt,
Yeah.
and there was a series back in sort of the mid 2000s that was about the goddess of the Drow, Lolth, uh,
Mhm.
like basically like being reborn,
Oh, interesting.
and that was actually a really fascinating series that I was sort of unsatisfied with at the end,
Mhm.
because like it was like a lot of evil characters, and
Yeah.
they sort of won at the end a little bit, and
Yeah.
so I didn't like that.
Mhm.
But then the story went on in other novels after that, and it wasn't like a real like triumph of evil, in the end.
Yeah.
But like that story arc definitely came to an end, and like the bad guys kind of won, and I was I was unsophisticated enough still at that time to be like, this kind of sucks. Um,
It's
and
okay to want a happy ending.
yeah, but like also it's good to be able to, like, this is kind of a thing that we
Uh,
talk about a lot here on the show, is like it's
uh-huh.
good to be able to appreciate things on their own terms,
Oh yeah,
you
for
know,
sure.
and that's something that uh and this is another thing that we do, is that we kind of gripe about evangelicalism. Um like evangelicals are bad at that,
Yeah.
because like we kind of like to wag our fingers at stuff, and forget that, like, you know Paul says, like, I don't judge people in the world. Like, if I'm going to judge anyone, it's going to be somebody who's in the church, who actually
Yes.
shares my convictions about things. Like,
Uh-huh.
why would I expect the world to act like Jesus? Like, that's
Yep.
that's not how it works. Like, and that's not what I should expect. And like, it's my job to portray that so that they're attracted to it, not to condemn them for not already being that way.
Yes. Wholeheartedly agree.
So
Yep.
but man, like, Honor Among Thieves, like, there's so much in there that's just so wholesome and wonderful, and
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, um, so okay, sure, we'll just go ahead and get into this. I don't think I've mentioned this to you. I haven't mentioned it to a lot of people who are actually listening. But I'm actually going
Yeah.
through a divorce right now.
Mm.
And so, like, for me, like, this movie and like a lot of other things where like there's kid stuff going on, and like
Yeah.
there's a hardship, or like the
Mm-hmm.
kids are in peril, or like not able to be with their parent, or especially their dad, like that's
Yeah.
hitting me on like a whole other level
Oh
right
gosh, I
now.
bet.
um because I'm not with them all the time, and
Mm-hmm.
so that was particularly resonant to me, and for uh, Ed is what they call it. Edgin. For Edgin to
Yeah.
to come to the place where he was out of excuses
Hmm.
and said to his daughter, like, I have been a bad dad,
Mm.
and there are reasons, but like it doesn't matter, and like I need to own up to it. And
Yeah.
like, and that place is really familiar to me too right now. And um and then like for out into stuff that's like, just, I feel like there's something in this movie that like just anybody can relate to. Like
Yes.
the like Simon is like awkward around the girl that he's interested in. Like I feel like maybe that's especially relatable for lots of people who like D&D. um, you know or like um at the end, when they use the tablet to bring oh shoot, what's the name of the barbarian
Yes.
character?
Holga.
When they bring Holga back, like, it's like that was so, like, when she comes back and she's like, don't tell me you wasted that on me. Like, why would you
Yeah.
do that? Like that was such a really, it's such a small moment,
Yes.
but like it's so, that's a powerful thing, you
Oh
know
yeah.
and like, you know like a sacrifice because of love, you know
Uh-huh.
like that's like, I feel like that's something that shouldn't be too hard for people who believe in Jesus to see the value in. And like
Yes.
when you have that kind of a story element in a movie or a story, like, you know this is like, and this is why I love doing this show, is like we can, like, there's always these kinds of themes that are interwoven, like, and I feel like especially in like fantasy stories and science fiction stories,
Yes.
like speculative fiction, broadly
Uh-huh.
speaking, like, does this stuff a lot. And it's almost like these patterns in stories are like cosmically significant, or like,
Yeah. It's
or
almost
like
like our story.
imprinted
Yeah.
imprinted in like a deep and like unavoidable part of our souls, and it just like comes out, like, even if we're
Yeah.
not really in touch with the whole truth of what that is, like, it's gonna come out because it's a human thing, and like in some way, like,
Hmm.
that that image bearing part of
Yeah.
us is gonna be expressed.
Oh yeah. I mean, why are we surprised that we who serve a storytelling God
Mm,
are drawn to stories? Like God God loves stories. He tells stories all the time in his handiwork and in um the parables. I mean, the Bible is
yeah,
filled with stories that he has told. And so to be surprised that we as humans want to sit around and tell stories to each other is kind of silly.
yeah.
Um and it's such a beautiful thing to be able to make up a story, to be able to tell stories and experience things and teach things, but also just to learn and to listen. And
Hmm.
yeah, I'm a huge fan of stories.
Yeah. What was your experience of the movie? Did you have anything in particular that you wanted to bring out from there?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, on one level, I just enjoyed, like I said, the Easter eggs and the
Yeah.
nostalgia of seeing those things. Um, but also, kind of agreeing with what you were saying earlier, I loved the fact that it was actually just a really good story, and how it's not surprising when you think about, like, D&D is a storytelling world. Like, it's a
Yeah.
world in which you can sit together and make up good stories and experience that together and stuff. And so to see that play out on the screen, where you've got these silly quests, and yeah, there's a lot of just, go collect these items quests, but a lot happens in those things, and character development happens in those moments. And um, I mean, getting all metaphorical, but there's something to be said for like the little things that we do in our life, or those moments that impact the end.
Sure.
In looking at the bigger picture, and the way we spend our moments, and as you said, the sacrifices we make, and how all that adds up to tell our story, whatever it might be. So yeah,
Yeah.
it has so much heart. It was Yeah, it was really good.
Yeah, it's like it's surprisingly heartfelt in a
Mhm.
lot of ways, and that was a really kind of a surprising and just a really wonderful thing to see about it.
Yeah, and it was funny, and it was well done, and it
Yeah.
never felt like it was funny just to be funny. It was like it just made sense in the moment, and everything. The characters were quirky and enjoyable, and um, obviously the acting was fantastic, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah,
Um,
like I loved some of the hard left turns that came and the things that really subverted your expectations, you
yeah.
know. Like like at the very beginning, you've got this big, this ugly orc that comes in there and like all of a sudden, oh no, now he's just like he's dead now. Like that's like
Oh,
because you spend a
okay.
lot of time. You spend a lot of time, like sort of establishing him a little bit. Like he was the focus of that whole first sequence, um, and that was,
And that's the end of him.
and then that's the end of him. And like the escape was great. Like that was
Uh-huh.
it's so fun in a story when like you don't see it all coming, from a million miles away. and
Yes.
and when you're dealing with fantasy, sometimes there are tropes in fantasy that are pretty predictable. um
Hmm.
and I think this one did a pretty good job of subverting those expectations a little bit.
Yeah.
But like also, like that also is very reflective of a really good D&D campaign, is when the players find interesting ways to use the abilities or special items that they have,
Hmm.
like the whole part of where they're like putting a portal, behind a painting
Yes.
so they can break into a place. Like that is a classic. That's a classic example of like a D&D party figuring out something cool to do. Um,
Uh-huh. And when it was on the floor, my son turned to me and he goes, "Ugh, they rolled a nat one." I was like, "They did. You're right."
yeah,
Because it was, yeah, just such a, oh man, that moment when you're like, "No, we tried so hard," and then it failed.
yeah.
Oh, yeah, it was so good. Um, yeah.
All right.
Sorry, in my head, I'm just like reliving all these moments. I'm like,
I
oh,
know.
I'm supposed to be talking about these moments, not just thinking about them in my head,
Yeah.
but they were great. Um,
Uh, well, okay, so we're coming up on we're starting to get close to an hour here, and I
yeah.
don't want to drag this out for too much longer. Is there anything else that you would like to say about D&D or just kind of role playing? Because like the world of role playing games in general is
Hmm.
just unfathomably enormous, and like you can find a role playing game for almost any sort of setting or like kind of thing that you want to do. And so there is one thing that I do want to say here before we end this,
Hmm.
is like it is absolutely possible to to get into D&D to an unhealthy degree. like
Hmm.
like that is a possibility. But at the same time, it's a possibility that exists with almost anything that you could choose to do. Like
Yeah.
like you can take anything to an unhealthy degree, and I don't think that there's anything particular about D&D that necessarily like pushes you
Yeah.
into into having an unhealthy relationship with it.
Yeah. Uh, I totally agree. It's what I always tell people is it's a medium for art. In the same
Yeah.
way that watch a movie or you read a book or you go to a play, they're all different ways in which stories are being told or things are being expressed, and none of those are inherently bad. There's nothing bad about watching a movie, but the movie you watch could become bad, or you could become overly dependent on watching movies, or whatever it case might be.
Right.
um, and D&D's the same thing. It's as good as the players at your table.
Yeah.
um, and you can take it anywhere you want because it's imagination based, because it's this kind of open world. You can potentially have players at your table that choose to take your story in a place that's not, you know, God honoring or good, or
Mm-hmm.
however you want to
Yeah.
define it.
And also like there are other games out there that for me personally like would be something that I would approach with a higher level of caution
Mhm.
than I think is warranted, with D&D just on the face of it. Um,
Yeah,
you've got games like, and I don't know, I don't want to actually bring up anything in particular
yeah.
because I know, um, because again, like
People might be at different places.
you take things on their own terms, and
Hmm.
and and you understand what it is and you act appropriately. You know,
Yep.
so
In all things, wisdom.
yes, yes. All right, so tell us real quick what is the book that you put out?
Oh, I wrote a book called Freedom to Flourish, and it's a book mostly geared towards women
Okay.
about what it means to be made in the image of God. So it's a very deep dive into Genesis 1 through 3,
Ooh,
looking at what,
fantastic.
um, yeah, a friend said it's like a commentary, but like not hard to read.
Okay, that
So,
sounds
so we
great.
go through, yeah, and look at what God actually says in those passages and how that plays out in our life today as far as being made in His image.
So, do you have a
So,
lot in there about Aether Canicdo and all that kind of
yeah,
good stuff?
yep,
Good
yep.
deal. Good deal. You should probably go back and listen to our Wonder Woman episode because. Oh, actually,
Ooh.
I don't know. Was Marilette involved with Christ in pop culture? No, she had her own blog. Anyway, the my guest on that show had a whole article that she wrote about Wonder Woman and like uh, image of God
Nice.
and like yeah, all that kind of good stuff.
Very cool. Well, it
Um,
is, yeah.
okay, so no, that's good. We can post a link to whatever the best place for. Is there a particularly good place for you for anybody to look that book up if they wanted
No,
to?
I mean it's on all the online stores, so
Okay,
Amazon or
yeah,
whatever.
very good. Okay, well as we do, we're gonna end with a piece of guaranteed good news.
Mm.
And today, this is a such a cool story. Uh, there was a lady um, who was separated from her family um, because and they had no idea where she had gotten to. This lady Linda, and she was actually homeless for
Mm.
28 years.
Oh my gosh.
And she ended up meeting another lady named Gabby who works for an outfit called Miracle Messages. and she just kind of opened up to her and was able to reunite with her family. And so there's a lot more to it. I'm going to post a link to that in the show notes, and you can find out more about how that happened, because it's kind of a long story. But it's such a, I love highlighting stuff like this, because even in the middle of or not in the middle, even if you've been going through something terrible for a long, long time, there's it's never too late. There's always a possibility of turning things around and getting to a better place, and that's the hope that we have in Christ, and that's the kind of things that the body of Christ is really good at facilitating when we're operating the way that we should be. and so yeah.
That's such a good story.
Yeah. All right. So some quick housekeeping before we leave. I do have a Patreon up for the show. There is a puzzle sort of encoded into that, and if any of you out there go and look at the page, if you can tell me what you think is being referenced as you read through the levels of support that are available there, the first person who can give me the right answer on that will receive the benefits of the highest tier of support without even having to contribute anything. But since we're talking about D&D here, I also have a special bonus perk for the first the first 4 people who come and support on Patreon will have the opportunity, if they want to be part of a mini D&D session that I will DM and that we will broadcast as a real play episode here on the show.
That is cool.
So yeah,
that's really cool.
So go to patreon.com/2geeksoup. You can find us on on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at 2geeksoup. If you want to email me anything, if you have any good news that's going on in your community, I would love to highlight that. Please send me a message about that. You can email me 2geeksoup@gmail.com. And Liz, thank you so much for being here. This was great. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, I appreciate it a bunch. And we can. I've got time here in the rest of the evening. If you do, I will talk to you as much as you want about my kids. But that's gonna do it for us for here. And also, you're probably hearing now our outro music and intro music is from my brother's band. He just put out a new single. So look up Daniel Levi Band on YouTube and Spotify, and you can hear some more of his music. I always like to show appreciation for him allowing us to use his music here. And and so even though it probably makes me the grouchy lunch lady, this podcast is a proud member of the More Than One Lesson faculty.